The Pacific should be the most genetically fragmented place on Earth. Isolated islands, thousands of kilometers of open water, no roads, no radio, no maps. But it isn't. Every people across this ocean, in Hawaii, in New Zealand, in Easter Island, in Madagascar, in the Philippines, speaks languages that share the same words, carries DNA with the same ancient markers, builds boats using the same techniques. They all descend from one population, one island, 5,000 years ago, and it's not the island anyone thinks. This is not a theory. This is the consensus of three independent scientific disciplines: comparative linguistics, population genetics, and archaeology. Peer-reviewed studies from Oxford, Harvard, and the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology all point to the same origin. The evidence has been accumulating for 60 years. What changed recently is that it became impossible to argue against. Today we're going to trace the full origin story of the Pacific, from the single island that started everything, to the moment Filipino ancestors became one of the first branches off that tree. The standard explanation says Pacific migration came in waves from southern China, pushed south by expanding Han dynasties. That story is incomplete. It explains the geography, but not the genetics, not the linguistics, and not the technology. The real story is older, more specific, and, if you're Filipino, far more personal than any textbook version. Here's what we're going to cover. First, why the Pacific is a genetic paradox that demanded a new explanation. Second, how Taiwan became the confirmed origin point and why that matters. Third, the navigation technology that made the impossible expansion possible. Fourth, the linguistic and genetic fingerprints that connect the Philippines to Hawaii, Madagascar, and Easter Island. And fifth, something about the Philippines that most Filipinos have never been taught. Let's start with the paradox. The Pacific is so large that if you removed every continent from the Earth and placed them inside it, you would still have room left over. For most of human history, crossing it was considered impossible. The prevailing winds blow east to west in the tropics. Currents push against you. There are no landmarks, no coast to follow, open water in every direction for weeks at a time. And yet, by the time European explorers arrived in the 16th century, the Pacific was already fully populated. Every habitable island, including ones so remote that Europeans wouldn't find them for another 200 years, already had people living on them. The explorers noticed something else. These people, separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean, recognized each other's languages. A Malay-speaking sailor could communicate, roughly, with someone from Hawaii. A Javanese trader could find shared vocabulary with someone from Madagascar, which sits off the coast of Africa on the other side of the Indian Ocean. This created what scientists came to call the Austronesian paradox. How does a single language family, the largest by geographic spread in human history, appear across half the globe, with no land bridge, no continuous territory, and no apparent center of origin? For most of the 20th century, the answer was somewhere in southern China. Vague, unsatisfying, and as it turned out, wrong. But that explanation had a problem, and the problem was in the DNA. The linguistic evidence pointed somewhere in Asia. But when geneticists ran the numbers, the origin wasn't on the mainland at all. It was on an island that China itself considers part of its territory, and the implications of that are still politically uncomfortable today. In the early 1980s, linguist Robert Blust published a paper that should have changed everything immediately, but took decades to fully sink in. Blust had spent years mapping the Austronesian language family, the family that includes Tagalog, Malay, Hawaiian, Malagasy, and over 1,000 other languages. When he traced the family tree backward, using the same methods evolutionary biologists use to trace species, every branch led to the same root. Taiwan, not southern China, not the Philippines, not Indonesia. Taiwan specifically, the indigenous peoples of Taiwan, the Atayal, the Amis, the Bunun, who speak languages so ancient within the Austronesian family, that all other Austronesian languages, including Tagalog, look like recent descendants by comparison. This became known as the out-of-Taiwan hypothesis, and for a decade, it was controversial. Then the genetics arrived. A 2008 study by geneticist Murray Cox and colleagues analyzed mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed exclusively through the maternal line, across dozens of Pacific populations. The results matched Blust's linguistic tree almost exactly. The deepest, most ancient genetic lineages in the Austronesian world were found in Taiwanese Aboriginal populations. Every other population, Filipino, Polynesian, Micronesian, Malagasy, carried a subset of that ancestral genetic diversity. In population genetics, this is called the founder effect. When a small group leaves a larger population and colonizes a new territory, they carry only a portion of the original genetic diversity. The further from the origin, the narrower the diversity. Taiwan had the widest diversity. The Philippines came next. Polynesia had the narrowest. The direction of movement was unmistakable. Out of Taiwan, through the Philippines, into the Pacific. A 2016 study from the Max Planck Institute using whole genome sequencing confirmed the timeline. The initial departure from Taiwan occurred approximately 5,000 years ago, matching the archaeological record of a sudden explosion in maritime settlement across island Southeast Asia. 5,000 years ago, one island. The entire Pacific begins here. But knowing where it started is only half the question. The other half is how. We know where it started, but the question nobody asks, and the one with the most surprising answer, is how they actually did it. Because crossing open ocean in 3000 BCE is not supposed to be possible, and the technology they used wasn't primitive. It was, in several measurable ways, more sophisticated than what Europeans were building 1,000 years later. In 1976, a traditional Hawaiian double-hulled canoe called hokulea set sail from Maui with no modern navigation instruments, no GPS, no compass, no sextant, no charts. It arrived in Tahiti 4,000 kilometers away 33 days later. The navigator, a Micronesian master named Mau Piailug, used only stars, ocean swells, wind patterns, and the flight paths of birds. He wasn't performing a stunt. He was demonstrating a system of navigation that had been in use for at least 3,000 years, the same system the original Austronesian migrants used to cross the Pacific in the first place. The vessel itself, the double-hulled outrigger canoe, is one of the most underrated technological achievements in human history. It was faster than any European ship of equivalent era, more stable in open water, capable of sailing closer to the wind, meaning it could navigate against prevailing currents in ways that single-hull vessels could not. When Viking longships were still hugging European coastlines in 800 CE, Austronesian navigators had already settled Madagascar, Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand. They had mapped and inhabited an ocean that covers half the planet. Archaeologist Geoffrey Irwin, who modeled ancient Pacific migration routes computationally, concluded that the Austronesian expansion was not accidental drift. It was systematic, intentional, and strategically executed against the prevailing winds specifically so that return voyages would be easier. They were building a network, not just escaping. The Philippines sits at the center of that network, not geographically peripheral, geographically pivotal. The technology explains how they spread, but the question that should now be forming in your mind is, how do we actually know all of this? What evidence survives after 5,000 years to connect a Filipino in Manila to an indigenous Hawaiian in Honolulu? The answer is in two places simultaneously, inside words and inside cells. There is a word in Proto-Austronesian, the reconstructed ancestral language spoken in Taiwan roughly 5,000 years ago, that means I. That word is mata. In Tagalog today, mata. In Malay, mata. In Malagasy, spoken in Madagascar off the coast of Africa, maso, a regular sound shift from the same root. In Hawaiian, maka. In Maori, spoken in New Zealand, mata. One word, 5,000 years, 10,000 kilometers. Still recognizable. This is not coincidence. In historical linguistics, shared vocabulary of this depth across this geographic range can only be explained by common ancestry. The words didn't travel through trade or borrowing. They were carried by people who left Taiwan, moved through the Philippines, and fanned out across the entire Indo-Pacific over the course of 2,000 years. Linguists have reconstructed over 1,000 Proto-Austronesian root words with this level of cross-language confirmation. They include words for boat parts, fishing techniques, agricultural crops, and kinship terms, the vocabulary of a maritime farming society that was already sophisticated before it began its expansion. But words can travel without people, through trade, through contact, through borrowing. The skeptic's question is always, how do you know people moved, and not just ideas? The answer is in the DNA. A landmark 2021 study published in Nature analyzing ancient DNA from 164 individuals across island Southeast Asia and the Pacific traced specific haplogroups, genetic signatures inherited unchanged through maternal and paternal lines, from Taiwan through the Philippines to every corner of the Austronesian world. One haplogroup in particular, mitochondrial haplogroup E, is found in high frequencies in indigenous Taiwanese populations, Filipino populations, and Polynesian populations, and in lower but measurable frequencies in Madagascar, Micronesia, and island Melanesia. Its distribution maps the expansion route exactly. The Philippines appears in this data not as a peripheral population that received migrants from elsewhere. It appears as a primary node, one of the first points of settlement after Taiwan, and one of the launch points for subsequent waves into the Pacific and Indian Ocean. Filipino DNA carries some of the oldest Austronesian genetic lineages outside Taiwan itself. That's not a metaphor, it's a measurement. The evidence is in the languages, it's in the genes. But there's one more layer to this story, the one that transforms it from a scientific finding into something that changes how Filipinos understand their own place in human history. Because the Philippines didn't receive this migration and pass it on. The Philippines was where it took root first. The linguistics and genetics in this video took decades of research across multiple disciplines to establish. If you want to go deeper on the specific studies, the 2021 Nature paper, Blust's Original Linguistic Reconstruction, the Hokulea Navigation Experiments, I've compiled a reading list with direct links in the description. Everything cited in this video is peer-reviewed and publicly accessible. Here is the version of Filipino history that most Filipinos learn. Migrants came from somewhere in Asia. They settled the archipelago. Then Spain arrived in 1565 and the real history began. That version erases 4,500 years. The archaeological record in the Philippines goes back further than the out-of-Taiwan expansion. The Taban Cave in Palawan contains human remains dating back at least 47,000 years, one of the oldest anatomically modern human sites in Southeast Asia. The Philippines was inhabited by multiple populations before the Austronesian arrival. But the Austronesian migration, the one that brought the ancestors of the majority of modern Filipinos, represents one of the most successful human colonization events in history, and the Philippines was its first major staging ground. Within a few centuries of leaving Taiwan, Austronesian-speaking peoples had settled the entire Philippine archipelago, over 7,000 islands. They developed distinct regional languages, all descended from the same Austronesian root. They built maritime trade networks that connected the Philippines to Borneo, Java, and the Malay Peninsula centuries before the Spanish arrived. The barangay, the fundamental unit of Filipino social organization, still the word used for the smallest administrative division in the Philippines today, is an Austronesian word. It comes from balangay, the large outrigger boat that carried migrating families from island to island. The social unit was named after the vessel that created it. In 1976, archaeologists in Butuan, Mindanao, excavated the oldest known balangay boats in Southeast Asia, carbon dated to approximately 320 CE. They were plank-built, precision-constructed vessels using the same lashed lug technique documented in boats from the same era found in Malaysia and coastal Indonesia. proof of an active, interconnected maritime culture spanning thousands of kilometers. This is the Philippines before colonization, not a passive recipient of outside influence. A hub, a node in a network that stretched from Taiwan to Madagascar. When you understand that, the 333 years of Spanish colonization and the subsequent history of American rule, of Japanese occupation, of every external force that shaped modern Filipino identity, all of it sits on top of something much older and much more foundational. Something that no colonial power created and none of them could erase. Here's what the science actually says. The Philippines is not a place where history happened to people. It is a place where people made history 5,000 years before the galleons arrived, 5,000 years before anyone in Europe had a word for the Pacific Ocean. The Filipino archipelago was one of the first places on Earth where the Austronesian expansion took root. The languages spoken there today, Tagalog, Cebuano, Ilocano, Hiligaynon, over 180 languages in total, are direct descendants of the language spoken by the people who first left Taiwan. That's not ancestry in a vague, sentimental sense. That's a measurable, documented, peer-reviewed biological and linguistic continuity spanning 5,000 years. The next time someone asks where Filipinos come from, the answer isn't Spain, it isn't China, it isn't somewhere in Asia. The answer is from the people who looked at the largest ocean on Earth and decided to cross it. That's where Filipinos come from, and now you have the science to prove it. If this changed how you think about Filipino history, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And the next video explores what happened when those same Austronesian navigators reached the edge of the world. An island so remote it took the rest of humanity 1,500 years to find them again. It's on screen now.